thank you so much for getting us all together, and thank you for being such a pro-business, pro-innovation president.
Well, thanks for hosting us. I mean, this is quite a group to get together.
It's incredible to be among everyone here, particularly you and the First Lady.
America's oligarchs. Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in the East. If you're around Donald Trump, you know by now that flattery will get you just about everywhere you want to go. Administration officials know it as well. So do lawmakers, and even CEOs now know it. When it comes to those CEOs and their businesses, Trump uses his leverage as leader of our country for something a lot more than just flattery. He's raking in money. Brand new blockbuster reporting in the Wall Street Journal reveals the scope of that shakedown and the epic proportions it's taking. An inside look into the massive level of fundraising Trump has been doing, and all the private companies giving and giving and giving at Trump's request. The Journal's report begins by mentioning Meredith O'Rourke. She's Trump's fundraiser, who he refers to as the, quote, Princess of Darkness, because she is a, quote, killer with donors. He calls her nearly every night. From that story, quote, Trump asks O'Rourke which companies and donors have cut checks and which have not, and for how much. He often asks her to make much larger financial requests than she was planning. For some donors, the ask is $5 million. For others, it is $50 million. And the president gives her names to call, often including people who have recently met with him, according to people with knowledge of the calls. What O'Rourke says on those phone calls with companies sounds like something straight out of the mafia. According to the Wall Street Journal reporting, she says, quote, this is very important to the president. He has asked me to call you and ask you for this donation. She persistently follows up with the companies. In some calls, she has referred to Trump as the boss, saying, quote, the boss wants this money, end quote. And apparently, the boss is getting the money. The Journal provides some staggering numbers. Quote, SoftBank donated $50 million toward Donald Trump's presidential library. Apple cut a check for around $25 million toward his White House ballroom. Microsoft gave around $10 million, and Amazon chipped in around $5 million, according to people familiar with the contributions. Meta Platforms recently gave $10 million to a Trump-aligned political committee, people familiar said, on top of a multi-million-dollar donation to the ballroom and a prior $22 million payment to the planned presidential library. It is an unprecedented amount of money that Trump is demanding and raising. The Journal estimates it at more than $800 million since Trump returned to office. And while an outside spokesperson for Trump and O'Rourke say that Trump can't be bought, what he's doing is reaching unheard of new levels. Quote, Trump stands out for taking personal control of the fundraising, and no sitting American president has ever raised these amounts for pet projects. At the same time, companies have paid new attention to the White House as Trump has gotten involved in regulatory decisions that once were made by independent agencies, dramatically shifting the balance of power across Washington. The boss wanting and getting his money is where we begin the hour with some of our favorite experts and friends. Chief political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, Josh Dawsey, is here. Also joining us, Norm Eisen. He served as White House Special Counsel for Ethics under President Obama. He's now co-founder of Democracy Defenders Action and publisher of The Contrarian. And with me for the hour, host of Politics Nation and president of the National Action Network, the Reverend Al Sharpton's here. Josh Dawsey, your byline is on this stunning reporting. I wonder if you could take us through it.
Yeah, Nicole, we were trying for a while to understand the staggering scope of the president's fundraising operation. We were getting tips across the newsroom about different companies that had been asked for money, large sums of money that they were surprised to get such audacious asks for. And we really wanted to understand what they were using the money for, how much they were raising it, and maybe most importantly, how they were raising it, right? How the actual apparatus worked. And what we found was that there was a president who's deeply involved in the minutiae of these requests, often asking companies like Chevron for $50 million, other companies for $25 million, giving lobbyists direct ask for their clients to give, and tracking this with his fundraiser, Meredith O'Rourke, who he refers to jokingly as a princess of darkness because she's such a killer with donors. And what they've done is put together an operation really like we've never seen before in Washington. All presidents raise money for midterms and for political committees, but the president has put together a number of committees across the government for his ballroom, for other construction projects, his political committees, and he's actively raising money for all of them. And corporate America is giving in large, large amounts to a sitting president. One of the most interesting things we found was after the election, Meredith O'Rourke, his fundraiser, who we write about extensively in the piece, was planning to slow down operations for a bit. He had just won. He was a second-term, president. He wouldn't be running again on the ballot. And the president said, "No, we need to start raising money tomorrow. We should strike while the iron is hot." And so that's what we've seen happening for the last 18 months.
I mean, Josh, you detail, I guess to borrow a term from the first term, quid pro quo. I just want to read some of the reporting. At a meeting with tobacco execs in May at Trump's golf club in Jupiter, Florida, the president promised to do much of what the executives wanted on policy related to vaping and the FDA. He took in millions of dollars in contributions for his political committees. O'Rourke sat in on the meeting. Shortly after the meeting, the FDA lifted restrictions on some flavored vaping products, and the FDA's chief was gone.
Yeah, that was a big meeting in Florida. The lobbyists and the different executives from multiple tobacco companies, Reynolds, Altria, went down, met with the president at his Jupiter Club. They served burgers. The president said, "What can I do for you guys?" And they told him that they didn't like a lot of vaping regulations. They wanted things changed at the FDA. The president during the meeting called Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He called the FDA chief at the time, Marty Makary. Mr. Makary didn't answer. He called other aides, and he eventually ordered in the meeting for changes to be made on vaping policy, for some other regulations to be loosened. And within about 10 days, the head of FDA, Mr. Makary, had been ousted from his job.
Norm Eisen, is that legal?
Nicole, the question of whether laws have been broken, civil or criminal, will occupy us as a nation for years to come. It's definitely corruption, abusing entrusted power for Donald Trump's pet projects. These are companies that have, like those vaping companies or Amazon or Apple or Microsoft, they have the huge interests before the federal government, and to be shaking them down for money in this way is so outrageous. Now, somewhere within those companies, there may very well be documents establishing that there was a quid pro quo or not. That is going to be the subject. Should Congress change hands, which seems likely, at least in the House, maybe the Senate, that will be the subject. Corruption investigations for years to come. When we've gone to court at Democracy Defenders, whether it's the slush fund, where Trump just appealed today, he does not want to be denied his $1.8 billion slush fund, Nicole. The Kennedy Center, where we won a judgment to chisel his name off the front of that building. When we've gone to court, courts have found that these kinds of activities are illegal. And what Josh has reported on with his colleagues smells even worse. Now we need to get under the hood. Were corrupt deals made or not? That is the question.
Josh, let me read a little bit more of the reporting. You write this: if a company encounters an issue with the federal government that comes to Trump's attention, he will want to know how much money that company gave. According to a person familiar with the matter, at times he'll rib the corporate leaders who haven't met the goals he set, the person said. Several CEOs and board members said they believe there's a link between their contributions and their access to the president. One chairman of a publicly traded company said that if you give the money, you know you were either checked on a list or crossed off a list if you don't. Do the companies worry about being accused of paying bribes?
Well, we've heard some trepidation inside some of these companies on what will happen if the Democrats come over and take over the House. Will the companies get subpoenaed? Will their executives be called to testify in front of Capitol Hill? Will they be asked to provide documents? Will they be asked to cooperate in investigations that they would prefer that do not exist? And so you hear a lot more about that in these days. But I think for a lot of these companies, Nicole, they really want to be in the room with this president because he's made clear he is the ultimate decision maker. He's going to weigh in on regulatory issues. He's going to weigh in on company specific issues. He's going to make all sorts of decisions. He's willing to go after, as we've seen, law firms, after universities, after others, and he wields an extraordinary amount of power for an executive. And I think a lot of these companies believe that contributing a few $1 million, $10 million, getting in on a fundraiser, getting into the White House, sort of is worth the price of admission at this point. Now, does that change, right? If Democrats take over the House, if these investigations are launched, do people decide there's a different bet to be made? It's a good question. I don't know the answer to it, but you do sort of hear increasing trepidation among, folks who work at a lot of these publicly traded companies.